Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have an Ultra League team to share with you guys that is gonna be really fun for you to use, but probably really annoying for your opponents to run into because this team has so much bulk on it, yet it is also super spammy. We are going to be using Virizion on the lead with Tentacruel with Poison Sting and Belly Bolt in the back. I'm really excited to be playing Ultra League again, especially now that we have a new meta, but I know that a lot of people do not like this format, especially since the Pokemon can be very expensive to build. But as someone who's been grinding this game for years, I always look forward to it because I get a chance to use the almost 200, maybe more than 200 Pokemon that I have built for this format. And now with Belly Bolt in the meta, I could not pass up the opportunity to build a team around this adorable electric type. It is so tanky, my goodness. There are some games, watch this one actually. This game up against a Lapras, my opponent has a shield left, I have a shield left as well. And it ends up being so close. I really thought here that I was going to lose this game, you guys will see. It comes down to Belly Bolt having 1 HP. And I don't want to give up my shield because I don't want to get hit by a Skull Bash, which will definitely take me out. So here I decide to risk it. My opponent has so much energy. I let the Sparkling Aria go, and we actually survive to reach another Parabolic Charge against this Lapras, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I've been having fun with Belly Bolt, and so have a lot of my opponents because you guys are going to see we run into this Pokemon so much in today's video. Also, a fun thing about Belly Bolt is that it can be sort of a budget pick because it's not a legendary, it's not a mythical, and it doesn't require any excels for you to build it. Now the one I am using it was the only good one I had, and it needed like 40 XL candies to be built. But I believe a really good IV Belly Bolt for Ultra League will not require any XL candies. The only XL Pokemon I have on this team is going to be that Tentacruel, and Virizion is a legendary, but it is a cheap legendary to make. So if you have one, you can go ahead and use it. Don't worry too much about IVs. You can look at the IVs I have on my team. Actually, they aren't that amazing. My Virizion is traded, but it was traded with a best friend. So whatever you have available to you, I would recommend just go ahead and make it. As for replacements for Tentacruel, because it is the only XL Pokemon on this team, if you want something that's a little bit more budget friendly, maybe another poison type, perhaps Muck, or maybe you can go with Golisopod. The only problem with Golisopod is that the team is then going to be ABA weak to flyers, but Golisopod can handle fire types, which Virizion is weak to. Now I am running Tentacruel with Poison Sting because it is very, very spammy, and I know that acid is recommended on it, and when you run Poison Sting, you do lose out on some of that poison type damage, but I really enjoyed it with Poison Sting, Scald, and Blizzard. I was able to land Blizzard on so many dragon types today. You guys are going to get to see that in this video. And of course, we have Belly Bolt with that buffed Parabolic Charge. Now, the reason this team works really well together is because you have Virizion on the lead, which is going to handle the ground types that your backline is going to be weak to. It's also really good against opposing Belly Bolts, which a lot of people are running. And it's going to be good against Zygarde, which again, your backline does not like to see. And for the most part, I was using Tentacruel as a safe swap to draw out any ground types because I am running it with the spammy moveset, so it can get to those Scalds very quickly, and Scald and Blizzard are going to threaten anything that Tentacruel is weak to, unless it's an electric type, which I do end up drawing out quite a few times with my Tentacruel, but either way, that spamminess is just so good. Now your backline is going to be able to handle those flying and fire types for you. And if you get a ghost type on the lead, just swap into your Tentacruel, but for the most part, try as best as you can to get the Belly Bolt on the Ghost type, because it is going to destroy them with that Sucker Punch. Aside from that, I don't have much else to say about this team. It is very solid, and I did not get a single negative set with this team today. I went, I think 4-1 in the first set, then I went, I think 3-2, and then I got a 5-0, and then another 4-1, and then I got another 3-2. So it was performing pretty consistently across the board, and I would highly recommend it. But of course, I was playing at rank 18 to 19, and I do end up getting my elo in this video. So I think tomorrow is when I will actually be able to tell if this team is good or not. But for today, it was excellent. Oh, and one more thing, in terms of weaknesses, I would say the worst Pokemon you could face with this team are going to be Nidoqueen, but like, really, who's running Nidoqueen? And Grumpig, because it is on the screen. I just remembered that Pokemon did give me a little bit of a hard time. Anyways, let's jump into these battles. In this match, we were up against the Grumpig on the lead. I just swapped out into my Tentacruel because I know that I could at least get some damage off on it, and then it would be a little bit easier for me to handle the Grumpig with Virizion if I have to. But my opponent swaps into Blastoise, and here I have to take a Skull Bash, which is really annoying. I don't know what my opponent's final Pokemon is, so I do want to save that final shield. My opponent's final Pokemon is a Florges, which is really unfortunate for us because the Florges is going to be resisting our Sucker Punches. So I go ahead and shield the first Moonblast. Thankfully, my opponent went for a Moonblast and not a Trailblaze. But I am going to start spamming out these parabolic charges. My opponent brings that Grumpig back in, which unfortunately reaches a dynamic punch, and they get us into the red here. Now, I am able to go for a parabolic charge for their Florges, and then I swap out into my Virizion because I know that I have energy. We can go for that Leaf Blade, and they get super, super low. But they're able to reach that Trailblaze, and one Sucker Punch is unfortunately not enough to take this Florges out, so my opponent takes that win. Moving on to the next battle, we get a terrible lead of Skeledirge. I swap out immediately into my Tentacruel, and thank goodness they are staying in. I'm able to reach a Scald, and they let it go. Okay, so their Skeledirge is now in the yellow, and I go for a CMP tie here on the Blizzard, really hoping that my opponent isn't going to call it. They let it go. They are now in the red, and in order to preserve Switch, I am gonna shield the Dragon Claw, and my opponent brings that Skeledirge back in. Okay, this is good. I now have Belly Bolt aligned to their Skeledirge, and I'm gonna let whatever this is go because I don't know what their final Pokemon is. It ends up being a Lapras. This is looking so good for me. I think my opponent goes ahead and quits here. Yep, they let the Parabolic Charge go, and I am going to take that win. Moving on to the next battle, finally we are seeing a lead that is in our favor. It's an Ampharos, but my opponent swaps out into a Shadow Gliscor running wing attack. I do panic a little bit here because my backline isn't amazing against Gliscor, but I end up swapping into Tentacruel because, again, we can reach those skulls super quickly. And I do manage to get a shield out of my opponents. They did let the first Scald go, which does a lot of damage. And I recognize here that my opponent isn't going to be able to reach another Earthquake, so I go ahead and double shield my Tentacruel, and we actually manage to Poison Sting the Gliscor down. A ground type gets Poison Sting down. But anyways, because I was able to Poison Sting them down, I come out of that with so much energy for the Ampharos that I'm able to go for 3 Scalds, take the Ampharos out, and then as soon as my opponent sees the Belly Bolt, their final Pokemon is a Togekiss, they go ahead and they top left. And this set is going to be a 3-2, but we do get better at using the team in the coming games. Now I want you to see all of the leads that we get in this coming set because it feels like everyone was running Belly Bolt lead, and Virizion was absolutely destroying that lead. My opponent runs Belly Bolt, and they swap out into a Primeape. I go for a Leaf Blade just to weaken them, but my opponent goes ahead and gives up a shield, which is still good for us. And then I am going to swap into my Tentacruel. Now this is where Poison Jab damage would have been good for me, but I am going to go for a Scald. And I think I might attempt here to Poison Sting them down. Yes, thank goodness we're able to take them out. Otherwise, I might have had to use a shield. And then my opponent brings that Belly Bolt back in. Now I do reach the Blizzard, so I go for it. And they take us out. I'm going to bring that Virizion back in. Everything is going to be resisted from Belly Bolt because they only have access to electric type moves. Their fast move is also resisted. Sucker Punch, it's a dark type move. And Virizion is a fighting type. It looks like I would have been able to double kick them down, but then my opponent swaps out into a Zygarde. Okay, let's see how Belly Bolt is going to do against a full health Zygarde. Well, not a full health Zygarde. I was able to go for a Leaf Blade against them and weaken them a little bit. And then I am going to bring in Belly Bolt. Thankfully, I have 2 shields left for this Pokemon. I'm just going to start going for these parabolic charges. And my opponent baits twice with the crunches. Okay, maybe I can go for a catch on the Earthquake on Virizion. So I'm going to farm up a little bit. And yes, we managed to catch the Earthquake on Virizion. It doesn't quite take us out, but I will be able to farm their Belly Bolt down and Sucker Punch the Zygarde down, take my opponent out, and somehow take that win. That was Belly Bolt Sucker Punching a full health Zygarde down, which is kind of insane. Moving on to the next match. Oh, look at that. Another Belly Bolt lead. Amazing for Virizion. We are going to go for that Leaf Blade. And I'm going to let whatever my opponent throws go. Of course, it's going to be Parabolic Charge. And the damage is starting to add up. And this Pokemon is starting to get very, very tanky. So I'm really hoping that I can take it out with the next Leaf Blade. But I'm not sure. Hopefully it's enough to KO and I can get this Belly Bolt out of the way. Yes. My opponent brings in a Corviknight. I farm up a little bit of energy and then I swap into my own Belly Bolt. Everything is going to be resisted from this Corviknight, especially if they are running Sky Attack and Iron Head, so I know that I don't have to shield anything from my opponent. The only move that's doing super effective to us is Sand Attack, but really Sand Attack is not threatening. Anyways, my opponent top left, so we're not going to see what their third Pokemon was. On to the next battle. Oh, look at that. Another Belly Bolt, the third Belly Bolt in a row, but this time my opponent swaps out into a Fortress, and I'm not really sure what to do against this because it's not great for my backline, but I know that Virizion is going to be resisting the charge moves from this Pokemon, so I stay in a little bit, I get it into the yellow, and then I swap into my own Belly Bolt. I was really hoping I could reach a move before my opponent could reach an Earthquake, and I might have miscounted there, but they go for a Rock Tomb, which I unfortunately shield. Or it might have been actually the right call because everything is resisted from their Belly Bolt, so shielding the Rock Tomb might have been good for me. But anyways, we are now up against their Belly Bolt. I do manage to catch the next Parabolic Charge on my Virizion, however, and I just go for that Leaf Blade immediately. I know that this isn't good timing, but I just want to damage this Pokemon. My opponent brings out their Fortress again. I'm able to go for a Sacred Sword to take it out, and then they bring their Belly Bolt back in to farm us down. I know that I win CMP over theirs because in the mirror match we did CMP tie and I won CMP, so I go for that Parabolic Charge immediately. My opponent uses a shield, but their final Pokemon is a Kommo-o, so I didn't even need my Belly Bolt for it. I am just going to go immediately for this Blizzard and hope that my opponent doesn't shield. They don't. It one-shots, and then my opponent is going to top left. Again, another Dragon type that I am able to land a Blizzard on. So satisfying. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Cobalion, which is a really nice lead for us, but my opponent swaps out immediately into a Golisopod. Okay, out of habit, I noticed swap Tentacruel into Golisopod, even though I don't have that poison damage anymore and everything is going to be resisted from Tentacruel, but it looks like we still should be fine because they are running Fury Cutter, thankfully. And I'm going to go for a Scald here. I was thinking that my opponent might shield if I go for a Blizzard, but we go for a Scald, but then my opponent just top lefts. I guess they just give up. They give up. So yeah, GG's to our opponent. And moving on to the next match where we're up against a Landorus. Okay, very interesting choice. I left this in because I love the spice. I love what my opponent is trying to do, but they swap out into a Primeape. They're probably running Sandsear Storm and Rock Slide on that Landorus, which Virizion is going to be resisting both. I bring in my Tentacruel for their Primeape. We're able to take them out with a Scald. And then, of course, they bring that pesky Landorus back in. I'm able to take a shield from them with a Scald. And I decide to shield the Sandsear Storm here because I'm already at the second Scald, so I know that I can take another shield from my opponents. And here they actually throw their energy, which is good for me. Now their final Pokemon is going to be an Annihilate. I'm just going to weaken them a little bit with a Leaf Blade before I swap out into my Belly Bolt, and I can start going for these parabolic charges. They go for a Rage Fist, which isn't going to do much. And their next Rage Fist is going to do, I think, the same amount of damage because I was able to buff my defense. So yeah, their final Pokemon is that Landorus. But because they're not going to be able to do anything to our Virizion, they are going to go ahead and top left. But I respect the spice. Anyways, that is going to be our 5-0 for the day. And the next set is going to be our rank 19 set, where I get my Elo. On the lead, we're not going to get a good lead anymore, it looks like, because we are up against a Typhlosion, and I swap out into Belly Bolt. My opponent brings out a Cobalion. Okay, I decide to shield the first Sacred Sword because I'm thinking maybe I have a chance here. I'm going to let the next one go and then start buffing our defense with the parabolic charges. They do quite a bit of damage to this Cobalion, which is pretty good. And at this point, it's looking like I can Sucker Punch this Cobalion down before they can reach another Sacred Sword. We come out of that with so much energy on Belly Bolt. We can go for 2 parabolic charges, actually surviving the first Incinerate from the Typhlosion. And then I am going to bring in Tentacruel here. Okay, I decide I am not going to use my final shield because I still have no idea what my opponent's final Pokemon could be. So I am now going to go for the Scald. Hopefully my opponent lets it go. They do, and their final Pokemon is a Feraligatr, which my Virizion will easily be able to handle. We can go ahead and safely shield the Ice Beam from the Feraligatr. And now I am going to go for a Leaf Blade, which my opponent doesn't shield. And at this point, I can just stick to a full farm down because I know that I am going to be able to live an Ice Beam. And my opponent has a shield left, but we're able to take that win. GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next battle, there it is, that Zygarde lead that I was anticipating, which is why I put Virizion on the lead. I am going to start to go for some Leaf Blades here to weaken them. And I am kind of worried about an Outrage, although most Zygardes are running Crunch and Earthquake, most likely for Belly Bolt because of how common Belly Bolt is. But my opponent keeps building up to a potential Outrage, which kind of scares me, so I do end up double shielding Virizion. Anyways, my backline is very bulky, so hopefully I won't need any shields for them. We get rid of that Zygarde, and then my opponent brings in a Corviknight. I just swap immediately into my Tentacruel. And they go for a Sky Attack, but then they swap out into a Moltres. Okay, I considered going for a Blizzard, but they have 2 shields left. Either way, I'm able to take a shield from them with the second Scald, and I'm gonna let the fly go. We survive with 1 HP, which is kind of annoying because it means my opponent gets free energy. But then I am going to bring in Belly Bolt, which should be able to resist both of the charge moves that my opponent is throwing. And they actually end up using their final shield on Moltres, which is pretty good for us because now we will be able to land a Zap Cannon on this Corviknight. It one-shots the Corviknight, and then we can Sucker Punch the Moltres down and take that win. That was Bellibolt sweeping the entire backline on that team. It was, well, we got really lucky because it was Double Flyer. Anyways, moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against a Tapu Fini on the lead, which is not the worst for Virizion because of how fast I can spam out the Leaf Blades, but I am going to have to shield the Nature's Madness. The nice thing about this team is because everything on the team is very bulky, you don't really have to be careful with your shields. But we take the Tapu Fini out, and then my opponent swaps out into a Giratina. I'm just going to swap immediately into my Tentacruel and go for a Blizzard, which lands. We get that Giratina so low, and then I'm going to go for another Blizzard on the Scuzzlord, but of course my opponent is not going to fall for it a second time. They use a shield, but then I swap out into my Virizion and go for a Sacred Sword immediately, hoping that I can do a lot of damage to the Scuzzlord, but at this point I think their switch timer is up, so they will be able to bring in their Giratina. I think I should be fine here either way. I am going to go for a Leaf Blade to weaken the Giratina and then swap out into my Bellibolt, and now it is going to be Bellibolt against a Guzzlord with red HP. I'm going to go for a Parabolic Charge, take my opponent's final shield, and all I have to do here is survive whatever the Guzzlord is going to throw, and then go for another Parabolic Charge against this Guzzlord, take them out, and take that win. GG's to our opponents. All right, on to the next battle. Oh, this is where we just get absolutely hard countered. We're up against a Galarian Weezing on the lead. I swap out into Bellibolt. My opponent farms up a lot of energy and then brings in a Gastrodon. Not great for me, but here I decide, you know what, they're going to go for Earth Power. So let me just shield just to see if I can align my Wind Switch and then align my Tentacruel to their Galarian Weezing, which does not end up going well for us because my opponent will be able to take us out with the next Mudslap. So yeah, I couldn't win that, obviously. But it got pretty close. If anyone was wondering how that matchup goes, I mean, there you go. Anyways, my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Moltres, and I was really hoping that the Blizzard would be enough to fully KO. However, it's not. They survive, they make it to that Brave Bird, and at this point there is nothing I can do against the Galarian Weezing. But moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against a Virizion. Okay, I think I'm just going to stay in this, but I get very lucky because it looks like my opponent is not running Sacred Sword. They are going for Resisted Leaf Blades. So I think this Virizion is running Leaf Blade Stone Edge, which is an interesting choice. I'm just going to go for these Sacred Swords, and I go for the next one immediately to get rid of the Virizion. Now with this out of the way, my Bellibolt should be safe. And then my opponent brings in a Shadow Drapion. Okay, I swap out immediately into my Tentacruel, but we draw out their Bellibolts. This is not good. And I think I do end up messing this up somewhere in the end, and my opponent ends up taking the win. But either way, we go for a Scald against the Bellibolt. We get it into the yellow, which is okay. And then I am going to bring in Virizion and start going for these Leaf Blades. Now my opponent swaps back out into Shadow Drapion, and I end up double shielding here. They go for an Aqua Tail and then a Crunch, which is kind of annoying. But then I am going to go for a Parabolic Charge to start boosting my defense. Okay. Now here I should just stay in against this Drapion. I should not swap out and clear the defense buff that I have at the moment because I might have been able to survive another Crunch. But because I tried to catch a move on my Virizion, I basically threw the game. So yeah, this Crunch is going to be enough to KO us, and my opponent is going to take that win. But either way, we still get a 3-2 in this final set, And we get placed at around 2,200. Yeah, 2,233, which is not too bad. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. That is going to be the end of our video. If you guys like my content, please consider subscribing. Maybe leave a like. It helps me out so much. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye bye.